All right, so in module 1, we are going to get really clear on what the definition of shame and particularly toxic shame is and where it comes from when we are someone that has survived trauma in particular. So welcome, I'm glad you're here and let's get started. So when it comes to shame, it's important to differentiate between shame and guilt. And these are two emotions or feelings that can be kind of similar and easy to get confused, but ultimately they are different experiences. And when it comes to both shame and guilt, there are a reason that these emotions exist. And so I'm going to tell you a definition I got from the website Very Well Mind about what shame is, because I think that it's a really good definition and one that I've used for myself and my work as well. So it says, shame is a powerful emotion that can cause people to feel defective, unacceptable, even damaged beyond repair. When you feel guilty, you're making a judgment that something you've done is wrong. But when you feel shame, you're feeling that your whole self is wrong. So take a moment and just consider the distinction between those two definitions. When it comes to guilt, what we feel is that we have done something wrong. We have hurt others or otherwise done something that we shouldn't have done, and we feel guilty about that. But when it comes to shame, shame is the feeling that us, ourselves, our human being, to our core, something is wrong with who we are. And so when it comes to trauma recovery and healing, shame can be really, really difficult to deal with because it's essentially telling us that who we are is wrong in some way. So let's talk a little bit, backtrack a bit here to what is the purpose of shame? Why does shame exist? Why does guilt exist? And so the foundational nature of both guilt and shame are strategies for ensuring safety and cohesion within groups. So while toxic shame in particular can be really, really destructive to us, there is a purpose that shame and guilt both exist. So if we think about human species, as a form of animals here on Earth, living through the ages and evolving, humans found safety within groups from predators, from famine, from problems and obstacles that we face in the world. So when humans were in groups, there was a better chance of survival. And so shame and guilt became emotions that we feel in order to correct dangerous and bad behavior to keep the group safe. So if you think about a group of people that need to band together to stay safe, to survive, if someone is doing something that is causing harm within that group to the other group members, or they're doing a behavior that could bring harm to the group, then they naturally feel guilt or shame, or guilt and shame might even be used on them in order to tell them that what they're doing is not okay. And overall, this is done in order for us to have consciences, for us to feel perhaps guilty or bad for doing things that are hurtful to others. So if you think about it this way, both shame and guilt aren't inherently problems. It is good and important to feel some guilt and some shame from time to time if we are doing something that is really harmful or wrong. But the problem is that when shame becomes extreme, when shame is a part of trauma, when shame becomes a core of our identity, then shame is no longer helpful when it's taken to this extreme. And this is what we're going to be exploring and unpacking throughout the course of this course, is that toxic shame really keeps us feeling hopeless, bad, broken, and stuck. And in addition, shame can actually be weaponized by abusers and oppressors to keep people under their control. So shame is not only something that we might feel within us as a result of trauma, but it's also something that can be inflicted upon us as well. So that's a definition of what shame and guilt are to help you see the difference. And now let's talk a little bit about, we know what shame is, so how does shame, and particularly toxic shame, present itself in our lives? I'm going to go over 3 ways that I notice toxic shame showing up. And that would be intrusive thoughts, habitual responses to problems, challenges, and painful situations, and within a certain set of behaviors that we're going to go over here. So one of the ways that shame can show up in our lives is through intrusive thoughts, intrusive, shameful thoughts. And when I say intrusive thoughts, what I mean is thoughts that pop into our head, into our brain suddenly, and cause us a sense of distress. So some intrusive shame thoughts could sound like, I'm not worthy of love. There's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. I have to hide who I am in order to be accepted. I have to pretend that I'm okay. I'm the worst. I ruin everything. I am broken, damaged. I have baggage. I let it happen. It's my fault, which would be in response to something like traumatic that's happened to you. So there's a whole lot of other examples of what intrusive, shameful thoughts can sound like, but overall, this thing is coming into our head and saying that who you are is wrong in some way. And oftentimes it can feel like our own inner voice that is saying it to us, or it might sound like the voice of a past abuser or someone that's hurt you in the past, or it might be both. The next way that shame can show up is habitual responses to challenges. So this is where shame is something that comes in as a response to kind of like anything challenging that happens to us. So you know that a habitual thought pattern has, shame has become a habitual thought pattern or a core belief when you find yourself responding to a challenge or a problem or something that happens in life that's difficult or painful with shame, self-loathing, or an intense inner criticism, or feeling like you beat yourself up a lot when anything happens around you. So an example of this would be something stressful happens at work, for example, or at school. You feel this pain, this pang of panic. You feel like a onset of panic or nervousness or fear, and your nervous system isn't able to stay calm in that moment. This leads to you immediately blaming yourself for what has happened. And then you might start apologizing or beating yourself up, or maybe isolating yourself, or generally just feeling really badly about yourself. When in reality, if we, circle back to what even happened in this scenario, it could be something that has absolutely nothing to do with you. It could be your boss looks at you and looks mad and you immediately jump to, oh, I did something wrong. Or in relationships, it could be that your partner is having a rough day and you immediately blame yourself for that. Or you have some sort of argument or disagreement with a friend and your mind immediately jumps to, it's my fault, I'm too much. So that's where shame comes in, as this habitual pattern that it just is there to sort of help you make sense of situations that are stressful or painful or uncomfortable. But ultimately, shame is usually toxic and not something that is actually helping us in the long run. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about shame-based behaviors. So I have 4 shame-based behaviors to go over here with you. Number 1 would be over-apologizing. So this is where you feel like you are perpetually apologizing or taking the blame, trying to take responsibility for problems that are not entirely or at all yours. So you feel like you can't help but apologize, maybe even for taking up space or just being your full authentic self. You feel like this need to apologize for who you are, or just apologize in general, even when you kind of logically know you didn't really do anything wrong. Then we have perfectionism, and this is where you feel like you need to be perfect in order to be good enough. Like you need to never fail or never do anything wrong, or never make a mistake like a human being, but rather you need to be this perfect person in order to be good enough. Shame really can drive that sense of perfectionism if deep down inside we feel like there is something inherently wrong with us and we need to prove that we are okay or good enough by being perfect. Finally, we have overachieving. And overachieving, then one more after that. But first, with overachieving, it's very similar to perfectionism, but instead of being perfect necessarily, with overachieving, we're focused on doing the most, being the best. You might feel really, really competitive. You might have a hard time resting unless you earn that rest. You might have a hard time not being productive and instead just kind of existing in the world without proving yourself in some way. You might not have to be perfect with it, but you feel like you need to always be doing the most you can and always being the best. And this can be driven by this sense of there's something wrong with me if I'm just a regular person, or there's something I'm not good enough if I'm not proving myself all the time by achieving. And finally, the last one I have here is people pleasing. And this is where you're making sure that everyone likes you, everyone's okay with you. You might feel really scared of conflict. You might feel resentful of others for no reason. This can all be driven by this sense of shame of like, I'm not good enough unless I'm making other people happy, or I'm helping, or I'm even fixing other people. Those are a few different ways that shame can show up within our behaviors, in addition to the habitual response to challenges and intrusive thoughts. So that is module 1 about what shame is and how it can show up in our lives. And I'll see you on module 2.